Welcome to the Nicole Murphy podcast. Today I'm doing an Instagram live with Joe Martino, and he is the founder of Collective Evolution and The Pulse. He's been working in the alternative media space for 14 years. He has so much wisdom, so much knowledge, and has experienced censorship and a cutting down of the business that has been really devastating. I'm excited to chat with him today about all things media, censorship. We're going to dive into the pros and cons of what we see in alternative and mainstream media. We're going to dive into fact checkers and really look at what does the future hold for conscious media. I think Joe's coming in right now. This is the most awkward part of every live. Me being like, oh, are you in? Are you coming in? Hi, Joe.
Does it not work?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. I was trying to determine if this was going to be distracting, but I think if I just sit here, it should be fine.
Yeah, that's awesome. My dad was telling me the other day, he's like, make sure you get everything out from behind your head. And then he's like, you know what, just use the living room. It's fine. For those who don't know, I'm living with my parents right now at 35 years old. So I'm excited for this conversation. I was just introducing kind of your background. And Joe has been, speaking out about these issues for a really long time. And I just want to bring attention to that because I did an interview with Sarah Swain the other day, and she was like, wow, I have to thank the people who knew what was going on, who was speaking about it for years before it took a pandemic to wake me up. And so I just want to thank you for that, because Collective Evolution had a huge hand in bringing attention issues, topics, conspiracy theories that are now mainstream.
Yeah, it's funny. We were just talking. I was talking with Richard Gage, the architects and engineer for 9/11 Truth founder, and we were talking with him yesterday, trying to do an interview, which ended up having some technical issues. But we were talking about how that initial like global event produced a great deal of change that it, almost primed a ton of people to be more receptive to questioning authority in the time of COVID-19. So I think we're all sort of in some way, shape, or form standing on shoulders of somebody before us, which is always a fascinating part of this whole, sort of human evolutionary journey here.
Yeah, totally. So why don't you give people a little background of Collective Evolution and how you got into creating media?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, never quote unquote wanted to be a journalist per se. It was more so I had always just liked asking big questions and exploring different ideas. And I guess the other piece to that was that when I was younger, probably 18, 19 years old, I started to feel a lot of angst about the idea of going from, your childhood life into you got to start making some big choices about what you're going to do in university and your work, your career, what's that going to look like. And for me, there was this sense of, I don't know that this feels super fulfilling, sort of the path I was on. And this, caused me to start questioning life, questioning things, which I did. And ultimately, I won't make the story too long, but through a whole series of events, ended up dropping out of college, all these different things, and just working. And the more I worked, the more I realized that the way we kind of live our life as a society has a lot of room for potential improvement. So I began writing about how I felt online, and that's what kind of initially started Collective Evolution. It was a mixture of writing about transformational ideas to writing about societal ideas and how we might be able to transition things. And then, of course, this comes with having to ask questions, like ask difficult questions about, what is the nature of how things function in our society? Why do they function this way? How can we change it? And that's kind of what started Collective Evolution on this journey of eventually what it became over the course of time, one of the biggest alternative platforms out there for a little while until censorship came along, and then that changed, and then we branched off and created the Pulse, and yeah, that's kind of been the journey. There's a lot of details to fill in there, but that's the general idea.
I love it. So let's dive into censorship since you started talking about that. What
Mhm.
For people who are out there saying censorship doesn't exist, Because there are
Yeah.
people who truly believe that it does not exist, that, it's almost like if your content's not being seen, it's because it's not popular.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who has that belief right now?
I would just probably send them all the different graphs and data that really supports the idea of what has happened. I mean, a lot of people don't know that there's whistleblowers from Google, for example, who have come out and said, here's exactly how we eliminated all these websites, talking about natural and alternative health. Here's how we eliminated it from Google. And for people who are wondering, what is the impact of that? Well, we used to get maybe 60, 70,000 hits a day to our website from Google as a search engine. So our website was so popular, we had so many people clicking and reading our stuff all the time that we ranked very, very high on Google. So if somebody typed in a topic and our website talked about it, it would be there. That's how we got so much traffic. That went, I believe it was in 2020, May of 2020 or May of 2018. I have to double check my YouTube versus my Google console stats. But one of them is, I believe YouTube is 2020. The other one's 2018, but in Google 2018, in May 1st, they just shut everything off. And you can see a straight hockey stick graph down. Just we're not showing up on their search engine results anymore. That's just one form of censorship. Other forms are the way they eliminated search terms from YouTube, right? So it's the same sort of thing. Instead of the Google
My
search
dad's
engine
here.
now.
He just
Yeah.
wanted to, for some reason, bug me. So
Yeah.
do you just want to come say hi to everyone since we're
No.
live? Yeah, okay.
I left this here because it's so smart.
Okay, he's going golfing now.
SMRT.
Yeah, bye, Dad.
See you later.
Yeah.
It's this very serious conversation about censorship.
Sounds like a great interview, though.
Yeah, it is great. And hopefully people stick around.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
So it cuts off.
yeah, no worries. So that went from, then YouTube came along, and YouTube's similar sort of story. You had, eliminating people from search engine algorithms, eliminating different types of content, demonetizing different pages. The idea is that, oh, well, they were sharing fake news of some sort. And I think, anybody who's kind of been paying attention has probably started to realize that this concept of fake news is extremely subjective. Yes, there are times where stories are fake and their stories are false. And, I've spent a lot of time trying to point that out over the years. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that are emerging or evolving stories, stories that just don't necessarily align with what the mainstream conjecture or mainstream narrative might be. And those stories are considered false, but they're not really. A recent example was we just had a story on the Pulse. We hadn't had, I would say, a fact check on Collective Evolution or the Pulse's Facebook page for many, 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 many months. It was a long time. And we just got one over an article that contains nothing in it that's false. I had looked at that a number of times, read over the article a whole bunch of times, trying to figure out why they gave this a fake news strike. The actual claim that they were saying we didn't make in the article. And when we went through the normal process, which is to say, okay, we check with the fact checker and we talk to them back and forth, say, hey, can we remove this strike? Here's the details, blah, blah, blah. Do you want us to make any edits? They came back literally saying, if you don't know what's wrong with this piece, then that our decision is final and that's it. And then they put, oh, and by the way, because of Facebook's new policies, we don't have to answer any of your future emails about this particular piece of content. So here is who is considered the largest, one of the most well-funded fact checkers on the internet, telling us that they refuse to tell us what is false about our article. And when you get a fake news strike, it means all of your page reach is diminished. So less people are going to see your content. Again, that's censorship. And here's a fact checker trying to say that we don't need to point out which facts are false. We don't need to tell you. Even though their article about our article, it doesn't even make any sense, right? So this is the kind of stuff that goes on. This is the kind of thing that's happening. It goes deeper and further. We could talk about censorship for like 2-3 hours. But I would say the only thing I will say is not every single person is innocent when it comes to fake news when they claim that they're innocent. There are a lot of alternative pages that are doing really nonsensical stuff and getting in trouble for it, and then saying, hey, we shouldn't have gotten in trouble. But there are also a lot of really great actors out there doing the right thing that are being censored at the same time. I think we saw that a lot with COVID.
Well, and that's what drew me to the Pulse and to your page, is because you were showing example after example of like, we were fact checked here and then they had to retract, or you were sharing stories about what you would talk about, years ago, and now it's more mainstream. So seeing that timeline was really key for me. That drew me to what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird because it's like one of those things where you're literally watching the narratives, the stories that were once complete conspiracy theory back in the day, and like it was very similar to the conversation I was having yesterday with Richard Gage and Madhava, as we were just talking about, like, here's a whole bunch of unanswered questions, right, about 9/11. Just we don't know the answer to these questions, and they make no sense. I'm not claiming to know what the answer to what exactly happened is, but all of these things factually, evidently, do not make any sense at all. And the implications of that are huge. And, to have so many examples like that, where you have all of these questions you've been asking, back in the day, it was geoengineering and chemtrails, right? It was the idea that there were planes that could spray stuff in the sky that were chemical compounds to modify weather, we didn't really know entirely what they were doing, right? Now, this subject is talked about in universities and in geoengineering circles, and it's like it's acknowledged as a thing that's going on. So here's a narrative that we were told, oh, it's complete conspiracy theory, but really all we were doing was saying, well, our eyes are saying this is happening. There's evidence that this is happening. There's literal chemical compounds that are falling from the sky that people are then taking and sampling and running through lab tests. And it all matches the story. What's going on? And, from conspiracy theory to reality, right? I mean, that's I think why so many people are frustrated. They feel gaslit.
And they have been. And I talk about this a lot too. It's like, if we waited throughout history, if we waited for the governments or the authorities to tell us what was going on, we would never know what's going on. It always comes from people, as you said, observing, looking around, getting curious. And it's so fascinating.
This becomes a big question, right? Is like, do you think that the government will one day just like come clean, for example, about all the mistakes they made with COVID-19 and just say, yeah, here's, sorry guys, here's the truth. Like, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that'll happen?
No, there's no way. No. And what's fascinating, what I find really fascinating, I'm passionate about human psychology. And I say that probably because I've had issues in my own life. and just, again, it's that experience. But I'm so curious as to, even if they did say certain things, if people would believe it. Because we get so entrenched in a certain filter. Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah, the phenomenon of a crashing worldview, and the implications of that. So if you're going through a moment where everything you thought you believed and you thought you knew was coming crashing down, it's a very uncomfortable feeling. For most people, if not, I almost venture to say for all people in some way, shape, or form, right? There's going to be different spectrums of how people respond to that. But in a lot of cases, that's what it comes down to when they're making the decision. Do I want to, per se, stop believing everything mainstream media is saying and maybe start opening up to what alternative media is saying? It's almost like a risk to some extent that you have to assess within yourself, because regardless of, it's easy to say, hey, let's just seek the truth. But, do we really want to know and navigate and unpack what that truth might mean? And I'm not even getting into the most deepest of conspiracies or anything, but sometimes something as simple as, the government pushed through, let's say, a vaccination that wasn't really properly tested, and perhaps their actions were reckless and unnecessary. What does that say? What are the implications of that, right? And for some people, that's very, very uncomfortable. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't go ask these questions. It's just that we kind of have to collectively sort of make space for what it takes to actually enter into these worldview changing questions and explorations.
Yeah, and I want to just go back because I thought of this when you were talking about your experience with the fact checker. if they were really dedicated to truth, why would they not just tell you what was wrong with the article?
Right. Yeah, it's this like nonsensical game that they're playing. And again, to be fair, like if you look at these fact checkers and like how often they get just beat down by other people, like in terms of like they get attacked, they get so many angry emails, they're the subject of so many lawsuits, right? I'm sure they're frustrated as heck too. But the general point is it's like at some point, and again, I know this is easier said than done, but at some point you have to say, you know what, I'm not even going to do this anymore. Like to be in a job where you have to control narratives, like it's being acknowledged in the courts now that fact checking is subjective, right? So you're having, the highest places of where evidence is being considered, and they're acknowledging, okay, fact checking is subjective. It's political. Well, how is anybody supposed to make sense of a world where, what is supposed to be fact is nothing but political ideology, right? It's complicated. Like I feel for audiences out there who are trying to like, who do I believe? Where do I like? I feel that way sometimes. Like, you're a trained journalist. Sometimes I'm sure you feel that way too.
Oh, I feel that way daily. And I want to
Yeah.
go back because I do have this question written down is how do people navigate the crumbling, even the most simple beliefs? This happens in our own relationships as well. This happens within ourselves where we like who we thought we were starts to kind of crumble. What we thought was real starts to crumble. And then when it's on a government level, a global level, a community level, how does someone navigate that?
I mean, I could put out all the things that I've been sort of in my own space, what I do, or the stuff when I ask that question, who do I look to, and how have I tried to come up with an answer to this? And I have a lot of things to say, but the bottom line is that I think it's really, really challenging because there almost has to be some level of acknowledgement and acceptance that we're in a time where it's very, very difficult to know what is. And it might be a little bit easier to start to understand sometimes more so what like might not be true. So like we know that this kind of isn't, but we still don't necessarily know what is, right? So we may not know entirely the whole story with what happened, for example, over the last 2 years with COVID-19 and so on and so forth, but we probably have a good idea of what certain things aren't true. And we might be able to kind of see where we don't have as much certainty as we think. And that's kind of one of the biggest pieces to the puzzle is being able to really navigate the space between where you know what you're certain about and where you know what you're not certain about. And kind of being able to hold that. And of course, all of this is built on a foundation of being able to sit with yourself, being able to understand your own awareness, understand your own feelings, understand your own reactions to something. Whether you have gut intuitions or feelings about something that can sometimes guide you is another, piece of the puzzle. However, I've been doing this for 15 years. If I had a nickel for the amount of times somebody said, hey, my intuition or my thing, blah, 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 says this and this is true, I mean, I'd be loaded right now. People's intuitions are wrong all the time. It doesn't mean that you can't develop that to be good. It's just that sometimes, what even is our intuition? And how do we know we're pulling from that and not some other response in our physiology, right? All roads lead back to self-awareness and that road of transformation.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot because sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy where I'm like, how can people not see how transformational self-awareness, self-development is completely connected to news and journalism and the stories that are, playing out on a global scale.
Yeah.
And I talk about this too, like it's kind of, I find it challenging. I don't know if you can speak to this. I find it challenging to do this work and know I'm going to be hypocritical at times just because it's like human nature. Know that I'm going to get something wrong. Know that I'm going to look back on something I've said and been like, oh, I was totally off base there. It's painful to show up when I can observe that and like know that that's kind of the human experience.
Yeah.
So now this is turning into a therapy session. How do I deal with that, Joe?
Well, again, I think this goes back to the sort of the concept of what we might believe about something and what our stance or position is on it, right? It's like this idea of, somebody can ask me something about, COVID vaccinations, or for example, and they'll say, how many people are going to be like injured, or all these sorts of things. It's like, well, I can tell you that what my belief might be, and I can tell you what the evidence actually says, and we can play with both of those options, right? And the key is if I'm presenting something to an audience and I'm trying to be responsible about what I'm saying, I'm going to make clear what might be my position about something and the evidence that supports that. And if I do have a hypothesis or an intuition or a feeling about something more, I can allude to that, but make it clear. And that way, in a sense, you're being able to express your curiosity, express where you're still thinking about things, but not necessarily going out and doing what so many of the prominent voices out there are doing, which is in 3 to 5 years all the people that have received the vaccine are going to die, which I think is there's no evidence for that, and it's grossly irresponsible in my opinion. But it's not to say that it's not possible that there could be some large scale issues. It's just, what do we gain by making such you know uh, crazy, choices. I mean, and I've said this before. It's almost like in that sense we're dehumanizing people who have received a vaccine down to just numbers that they're all going to die, right? It's like we're not even thinking about people and what our words and what implications that might have. And I think this sort of leads back to that question of, what do we do to sort of navigate areas where we might be wrong? It's like, well, I mean, just the fact that you have awareness that that process may unfold usually will cause you to kind of be a little bit more careful, a little bit more open, a little bit more playful about it, right? I think the breakdown in sense making that is happening, and people not knowing where to turn, what's true, what's going on, is ultimately creating an environment where we can't solely rely entirely on just like these hyperbolic statements all the time. Um, and we're going to go crazy if we spend all of our time just mentally trying to figure out the world. It's forcing us into this uncomfortable position of having to say, okay, how do I calm down? How do I regulate? How do I find a sense of peace? And then perhaps generate a balance between how I look at information and how I feel, and kind of figure that out. Because I also think a lot of people, got really, really deep into information and news over the course of COVID because we wanted to know what was going on. And I think there's a bit of a pulling back effect that's happening now too.
Definitely. And let's go here now. What do you think, people are gonna be mad about this, what do you think mainstream media actually does well?
I would say that this is a weird one. Their rigor when it comes to fact or when it comes to evidence is generally better than generally. Now, what's the asterisk that I write with that? Where they derive what they think is fact can sometimes be the issue. Where they derive what they think is an authoritative position or from an expert is the issue. Because I think there's a significantly less chance that mainstream media is going to take a set of facts or a story and just run to print with it, or just post it online really, really quickly in a rush, trying to be the first person to be viral, right? I mean, I know mainstream media does that. They want to be first, but they're careful about what they do. And I can't say that about all of alternative media out there. There is sometimes a desire to just get it out there because it'll be viral, and that's it, that's all. And there may not be as much verification of fact. So I think in that way, they do that well. Keeping the message simple is something that they also do pretty good. They keep the message pretty like linear and simple. I mean, that's kind of what I would imagine. I've never done formal journalism training. However, observing what happens and what comes out of mainstream media seems like they're specifically tailoring the way they derive their content in a way that's understandable by the largest amount of people. And the way they typically talk about this is they write at like a grade, whatever,
5,
3,
yeah.
4, 5 level, whatever
Yeah.
it is, right? So I would say those are the areas where I think they do good work. But yeah, I don't know. What would you add to that?
You hit the nail on the head with the two that I was kind of thinking about. Is they do a good job of checking the facts, but they're not always filtered the correct.
Yeah.
Like the context is skewed, so they don't get the full picture, and they're good at story. They're really good at not being confusing, which is what you were getting at. I mean, we're taught that. That said, throughout the last few years, what I've seen has been really confusing. There's a thing called burying the lead, where the main part of your story that you want to get clear about gets pushed way lower, and it should be at the top. And what I've seen with some V-injury articles is they start with a few paragraphs of alleviating fear. This is super rare. Here's the government link, even though we know that that is majorly underreported. We know. And it's like this alleviation of fear to get into the story and to like get into what's going on, which I hadn't fully seen before the last few years. So I'd say this is what's hard for people who work in mainstream media to get their head around, is they are trained to do it in a certain way. And as you said, be very detail oriented and not make mistakes. But where they're getting their information is very questionable, and it's not, I don't think they're listening to the people as much anymore. It's yeah.
And I think I think the challenge is there's an assumption that World Health Organization, the CDC, the FDA, so on and so forth, I mean, they just have to be right. Health Canada has to be right. Or we have a responsibility as media and journalism in the mainstream when there might be a crisis or something going on. We have a responsibility to just convey whatever government is saying. Well, I mean, that defeats the purpose of what kind of journalism is about, right? Because you're supposed to be holding them to account, right? And so, again, it's not to say that, well, in the time of a crisis, the government's always going to lie. It's to say, can we find out if they are, right? And be open to that. And I think that's what went completely out the window with the mainstream. And I would say over the last little while, you've had journalists leave the mainstream and then start talking about what happened. I mean, through our mutual friend Richard Garner, I've heard some interesting stories. Because
Trish Wood, we got to talk to.
Trish Wood has talked about things. There's been a lot of people talking about problems within the mainstream media that, they're like, we weren't allowed to write stories. Plain and simple, they weren't allowed. So some of these journalists, and this is why I always tell people, it's like it doesn't really help us to say, well, the mainstream media isn't always bad. It's like 100%. That doesn't help us, because there's actually a lot of, decent stuff in there. And then there's a lot of journalists that actually want to say something, but they can't because of the position they're in. And I've seen that time and time and time again. Now, again, the point is I think at the end of the day is that you have to question whatever you're getting your information from, right? Whatever your source is, you got to question it. You got to look at it. Because there's bunk everywhere, to be quite honest, and political agenda everywhere.
Yeah, and I was saying yesterday, if you feel like someone's offering you up certainty in journalism, then you might just want to assess that. You might just want to look at that, because, and I get into those places sometimes too. We're just seeking to have the person give us the answer.
Yeah.
Mainstream's always wrong and alternative's always right. Well, we've very clearly seen that that's not true through the last few years as well. That said, alternative media gets called out all the time, and I don't see mainstream media getting called out in the same way by fact checkers,
Yes. Yeah, it's a lot more rare. Usually if you go to a fact checking website and you really sift through, they're usually picking on mainstream media on stories that seem unimportant, or stories that seem, almost like they're picking on a lack of political context. So it's like, well, this is okay, but they missed a little bit of political context. So it's like they're just picking on small details and nuances, but they're not, for example, any mainstream media outlet that isn't updating a lot of its stories about, for example, anything that was said about the lab leak early on. Technically, all those articles are false, right? At this point, right? Because it was literally called a baseless conspiracy theory, and it was written everywhere. And so now either those institutions have to go back and delete those articles, or make it, the right way to do it would be to make an update, and say, hey, here's our correction, here's what's going on. And if they don't, fact checkers should be all over them, right? If fact checkers are going to come after me for an article written in 2016, this actually true story. We wrote an article way back in like 2015, 2016, a study that was basically saying, you know what, milk might cause problems with bones, right? Here's the rate of osteoporosis. Here's what was talked about, right? So you go, okay, that's the story, right? It's just we're reporting on a study. They come back and they say, well, other studies say different things, therefore this is false, right? So it's like, so you're going to go back 5 years and pick on like a story so that you can give us a strike, but you won't even touch anything the mainstream media gets wrong, right? And again, it's the unfair treatment of independent and alternative media.
So what does independent and alternative media do really well?
I would say that there's a lot more openness to explore different ideas and different, like, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Alternative perspectives on things. And I think that's crucially important because, I mean, we're complex beings, humans, and stories are usually very complex, very complicated, you know? So, you know, being able to question, like, just think about something as simple as when you're growing up, you kind of learn, at least I did, there's two explanations for why or how we got here, right? It's God in some religious capacity, God created humans, or you know, evolution explains it. Well, the problem is there's, you know, one, there's no way to prove it at all, and the other one is has so many holes in the story that as a theory, it's a theory, right? And anytime another explanation comes forth, it's seen as like, no, that offers nothing. But it's like, well, hold on a second. There are literally all these other perspectives that are pretty interesting when you actually go down the road of looking at them and listening to them. There's a lot of really, really interesting perspectives out there that just are not taken seriously. And it's like not really an option, right? So these are alternative ideas that are asking us to question these basically binary options, either this or this that you believe, right? But there's so many other options, and that's ultimately what I think alternative media does well is potentially looking at other possibilities and other ideas about various stories, about various political ideas, societal ideas, right? There's different types of alternative media. There's some that are extremely political. There's some that are perhaps extremely conspiratorial, and there's some that are trying to more so make the world a better place and, like, you know, thinking about things in a different way. It's tough.
It is. It's so interesting. So where do you think media is going? Where do you think, is it adjustments to what we already have? Is there ideas of, like, what could media look like in the future? That's, I mean, most beneficial for people, whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, you know, where I think certain parts of it will go, which is kind of like, and we've talked about this before, AI will start writing a ton of articles,
Yeah.
you know, and do the mass reporting. So if you have, you know, Associated Press or Reuters who are just getting press releases, right? So there might be a journalist somewhere on the ground that sees something and then sends that to AP or Reuters, and then that gets filtered down to all of the big, you know, newspapers and sources and so on and so forth. I mean, now it's like those stories and those press releases are going to be filtered into all of these outlets who are now, it's just going to be AI writing all this, right? Like, why pay a person when your machine can just do it? So, you know,
And
so
I
I
just
think
want to interrupt really quick. Sorry, to just for people who are listening, going, that sounds crazy. They're already testing it out. They've already written articles about this. So go on.
Yeah. So I think that is, you know, that's going to happen on one hand. I think, you know, more on the, where do I want to see it go? You know, where do I want to see, I just particularly would like to see less of a drive towards this classical, you know, every news outlet has to have a political spin. It's like, sometimes it's just like, I get it. I get that it's like, you know, people are going to be different. We're going to have different ideas. And it's okay to take our ideas and put it into a container, i.e., I'm a progressive, I'm a libertarian, I'm a Republican, whatever it is. It's like, I get it, but at the same time, you're by nature creating these divisions and these boxes and these ways in which agendas and story selections and all these sorts of things are going to be spun, right? So I would like to see almost no political affiliation with newspapers. Now that means you're going to have to basically change the ownership structures of all of these media outlets, because almost all of them are owned by people who have their own agendas, and things are put out that particular way based on the agenda that they want to push, right? That's been like that since time. Newspapers have been doing that since time, so this is not a new idea. So I would like to see some of that. I would like to see, I don't know, almost like just a more of a almost like a sociological or philosophical set of questioning within it. Like, what does this really mean? What about us as people is really driving this particular story, this particular idea, this event that happened? Like encouraging people to think past this person is bad. This country is bad. Like that's ultimately what so much of our media is these days. Is it's like, here's the story, and by nature of we don't care what human condition caused this, it's just bad, right? We're never really going to solve problems. And one of the interesting ways to look at this is, you ask the question, it's like somebody becomes an abuser. I'm so fascinated about how they became an abuser. What led them as a child to become an abuser? Because then if you can actually get to the core, you can start to make this problem potentially go away in the future, as opposed to, well, we have an abuser, we just need to put them in jail, and that's it, right? That's how media views things in the same light. It's you have a bad person, we need to solve that problem, but we never solve anything at the core. I just wrote a piece called when racism plummeted when people were told aliens exist. And it looks at a story of a study that was done in the United States. And, I'll say this right off the top. I contextualize what racism means in this particular piece, because I think that's a word that's also just gone off the rails and kind of means everything these days, which I don't think is productive. But, I kind of make it clear, but the basic idea was this researcher was trying to understand, why do people think the way they do? And how did people become very controlling in their views of society and what should be done? And then why are some people more open? And how do those people respond to people that are different from them? To people, whether they're different because of skin color, whether they're different because of culture, whether they're different because of just ideas, right? She just wanted to understand all this. And I won't give it all away, but it's fascinating what them running an experiment where they said, just so you know, aliens exist and they're nothing like us. That one, trick they played on these people for the purposes of the study was fascinating in terms of the results that it produced. So I'll kind of leave that there. I encourage people to go check that one out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's really interesting. And that's happening, as you're kind of alluding to too, on alternative and in mainstream media. These are the good people, these are the bad people, the virtue signaling, the tribalism. That is really fascinating.
What's your number one? What's the big thing you would want to see changed?
I'm not just trying to use your thoughts here, Joe. I'm really not. But I talk about this quite a bit, and I was telling my family about this. I've been in different groups and different situations throughout my life and different religious environments and things like that. I feel the most excited and the most myself when I'm surrounded by people who don't have the same ideas as me. But everybody's very curious, and it can get heated at times. There can be, but that's where I feel the most productive and myself. So for me, it's similar. It's just creating more environments where there's actually diversity of thought, where there's philosophical discussion, where people disagree, but that doesn't mean they don't love each other, or that doesn't mean anything against their identity, Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means.
100%. And it's interesting because there's almost this idealistic view that often is had within various circles where, we'll eventually get everybody to think the same, right? Or, eventually everybody will just have kind of the same understanding of the truth, right? And I don't think that'll ever happen. It'll definitely I think we will have unifying factors. But and I definitely believe we will deeply improve, and I think we're being forced to right now, to be honest. We'll deeply improve our capacity to, see our similarities more than our differences. And what I mean by that is to connect deeply with where we are similar and to notice where we're different and allow that to enrich our lives, but not become this obsessive point where here's how this person is exactly different, and ooh, we need to go out of our way to celebrate. It's like it becomes so inauthentic, right? So much this like heightening of obsessing over diversity. There will always be diversity. It's a fact of life. When you go outside, you're not obsessing over that is a tree and that is a blade of grass, and you just notice it and you allow it to be part of your environment, right? There's this like cultural obsession right now with like everybody, we have to lift up everybody's differences. Well, the interesting part of the alien study was that they proved that celebrating and going crazy about people's differences is the worst way to unite people. It literally does the opposite. It just divides them more, right? So here you have this in a sense, this sort of cultural woke ideology that's been happening for the past little while. Touching on anything from gender to sexuality to race to socioeconomic class, all these different things. And we're taking, for the most part, these are all important issues, but we're taking, for the most part, the worst route to solving those things. And we wonder why there's more division. We wonder why there's more hatred. We wonder why. And I thought this study kind of lent an interesting idea towards kind of how we might be actually creating more division, and what we might be able to do something different. But I don't know. I thought it was interesting for sure.
So interesting. It's so interesting. And what's crazy right now is you saying that. People could be like, you're racist.
Oh, of course.
Or you don't understand, or like that's the issue that we're dealing with, is just like not having these conversations that can just flow. And I guess I'll just be like, for me, when I really reflect as to why I would need people to be believing the things I believe or doing the things I do, it is like a feedback system of validation. And it's nice to be validated. That's why people seek out like-minded people. That's what everyone's like craving right now. I don't want to be alone. I want to be around like-minded people.
Yeah.
But where can we hold space and be like like-hearted?
Yeah.
And not need that feedback in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's we'll have to find, and I think there's lots of different ways for this to happen, but we'll have to find ways to be able to be more present, more embodied, more within ourselves, more just kind of like in a state of being for the most part, as opposed to being such like a sort of a mentally sort of heady driven type society. I think we've kind of been invited on a deep level to spend most of our times, most of our lives in our head over the past while, and I think it's just continually building up more and more and more and more and more of that. And this is why I think this idea of transformation, it's like it's the trickle down, right? Like upstream from how media functions is how culture functions. Upstream from how culture is built is who we are and how we believe certain things. And upstream from that, it can be our biology and the way our biology is biased towards certain things. And upstream from that is how much self-awareness do we have of what's going on within our biology, right? So you see, if you want to solve a problem, you got to go all the way up the ladder and start understanding what is the source, what is the core of how so much of our world views, therefore so much of our actions, where is it coming from? And then how do we find reliable ways to be able to explore what is driving our worldview, what is driving how do we get to our self-awareness, the sense of flow, the sense of being in a space where we can feel and we can notice? How do we get there reliably and regularly, so that we can kind of have that sense of exploring, as opposed to just, here's my crystallized idea and everything that challenges that is,
like
yeah.
That's what it feels like though when you're in that state. It's interesting you did that motion with your body, because it's a protective thing as opposed to an open experience. So we both also like to think, though. Like you're very thoughtful, and you spend a lot of time digging in your brain and being in your head as well. So what does that balance look like? Because someone who's only being, I think there can be a lot of problems with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, being is using your mind, right? At least in my opinion.
Okay. Maybe
Being is, it's sort of, if you're in the present moment, it doesn't mean your mind is gone. It doesn't mean that your mind doesn't work. I mean, your mind is technically always working. It's technically always filtering out and taking in and making sense of, basically a soup of energy that is all around us. Our mind is logically crystallizing those ones and zeros, if you will, just to create a visual. It's crystallizing those ones and zeros into things that we see, right? So our mind is always going, it's always doing something. And the process of thought, or the process of exploration, is something best, it's like the idea of a monk, right? A monk will sit there and meditate. It's not that they're not thinking, or that they don't think, or that their insights aren't, in a sense, thought. It's that what they're doing is they're just slowly but surely sort of quieting the endless chatter and the strength of the chatter in the mind. And in some cases, there's different parts of the brain that are turning on, right? There's different connections that are being made. We can start getting into the idea that some form of external information can be pulled into the mind, right? Can be pulled into the brain and be expressed in some way, shape, or form, right? That's a whole other piece to the puzzle that's on metaphysical and the spiritual side of things. But ultimately, there's a quieting effect that allows there to be more contemplative thought, more calm, more clear, less jumping from all of these different knee-jerk or trauma responses that might be going through the body, right? That's what meditation helps us do. It's not meant to create a silent mind as much as it's meant to create a quiet mind. And another way to think about it is, it's like those monks, for example, they might, you might liken, if you can achieve it, and there are places where people can achieve this type of thing, a type of quiet mind that's just so dead quiet. There's even your whole body can become so, I've had these experiences myself from different types of breath work or different types of meditation that I've done. And you might see that as like going up the mountain. And as you go up the mountain, it gets more pure and pure and pure, right? This is just kind of the analogy. Then you get to the top and you're like, oh my God, this is the purest space. And then what do you realize? Oh, I'm kind of up here by myself. Okay, well, there's not a whole lot to do up here. Okay, I kind of can see more clearly now that I'm up here. I can see what's going on down there. All right, let me take that knowledge and go back down the mountain and play. And that's kind of the idea, is how do we perhaps regularly and reliably get up to that top of the mountain? Or how do we even take 10 steps up and just kind of stay there, a little bit of a higher elevated perspective, instead of just being in the weeds, in the trenches every single day. That's some of the ways, if that was clear, in which I interpret kind of that being in a place of being a little bit more present, kind of allowing your body, allowing your mind, allowing your senses to pick up our reality a little better.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's not turning off the mind. It's just being more aware. Probably also regulating the nervous system is what you're getting at as well.
Absolutely. And, and it's not like we're going to be in this flow state constantly, right? It's more so, if the flow state, again, for visual sake, if the flow state's here, and this is like just being in a completely chattered mind all the time, how do we elevate our baseline being so that we might be here as a baseline, and then we can go to flow and then come back down, as opposed to go to flow and then come back down, So it's elevating our baseline, and the concept of baseline is discussed a lot in flow states. It's discussed a lot in nervous system health, right? We generate a baseline based on a multitude of physiological responses. I mean, you know a lot about neuroplasticity in the brain, right? If your brain is in a certain state, that's your baseline. And you can reprogram that and create a new baseline. Again, we're kind of getting into a lot of different topics here.
But this is so important. And I think that it's good we're having this conversation because I've talked about this a lot. Alternative or mainstream media often uses a flight or fight, if it bleeds, it leads type of experience to get people interested in their news. Now, I'm not saying that that's good, bad, right, or wrong. Like it's just, it is what it is. And what I'm noticing in my life with myself and when I observe is we have this real, as human beings, almost like addiction to this fear response, this sympathetic nervous system response. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, it's not bad. We need it. It's very important. So it's not like parasympathetic good, sympathetic bad. They're doing, it's like metabolic health. You want to be able to shift, from my belief. But how do we, with media, with story, with news, how do we get people interested in it without tapping on that fear button? Is there a way?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. I was literally just earlier. I might have to close the window. Just give me 1 second.
I thought it was one of the other cats. I was like, oh, the cat's.
That's kind of one of the $1 million questions. I was having a conversation with another colleague he's a writer. He's a very prominent sort of writer, and felt like he should be having a bit more success, let's say, with his writing platform than he was currently having. And sort of asked, hey, do you have any thoughts or advice? And I'm like, you know what? I'm in the same boat, I think, as you at the moment, sort of questioning. It feels like the if it bleeds or leads, or it feels like the more radical statements, headlines, stories are getting a lot more attention and spread a lot faster than the ones that are more metered, grounded, let's say truthful per se. And that's an interesting situation that we're in. The funny thing is, just before I came on here, I came across a study that was basically saying that content that produces anger is, at the moment, significantly more contagious than any other type of content. So what they're seeing is that it'll spread further because people are, there's some other research that actually supports this, that says one of the best ways to connect with somebody is to find your common hatred. Which is really fascinating, right? It's what is the thing that we both dislike, and then we unite on that, right? Here in Canada, it's like you find somebody else that dislikes Trudeau, and it's like, oh my God, all right, yeah, it's weird. Like, why is this happening? But this also relates to the article I was alluding to earlier about when racism plummeted when people were told aliens exist, because what they found was that there's deep power in connecting our similarities, right? So. The general point here is that this question of is it bleeds, it leads, and what do we do and how do we get people? I think it's ultimately going to come down to, one, if we don't change our state, right? Because when you change your state, you're a lot more free to pick up and choose. Let me look at this, right? You're also attracted to different things. Usually, you're not as interested in really buzzy or really harsh, driven content on either side per se. So changing our state is one part to it. The other thing is just, maybe to just try, and I'm thinking about this, finding ways to produce headlines or produce pieces of content that invite that here's where we might be similar type of idea. I'm speaking about this off the top of my head. I'm not sure how to do that entirely. But I do think there's a bit of a challenge right now where people have become so desensitized to just, headlines and anger and extremities and radical stuff, and that this is all that can move them to click or to look at or to do something. And it's harder to just sit down and pick up anything and read it and explore it and try and understand it. There's less of a motivation there. And I do think some of that's physiological, but that's some of my take on that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
This kind of came to when you were talking. So that connection through anger, my first thought was isn't that trauma bonding? To be just bonding over the mutual hatred. I also tried to be well, anger is not a bad emotion. I've lived a lot of my life thinking anger is a bad emotion. So then for me, I'm okay, so my first thought is anger's bad, but maybe there's something there that I need to look at. right? Maybe there is an important connection that happens through anger when it's placed in the right place. Like Justin Trudeau, easy to be angry at him. That's probably not where the anger needs to be funneled towards. And then the last thing I would say is the content I've kind of been playing with and creating. I heard encouragement is going to be the big seller this year. And so
what do you mean by that? Where did they say that, or who said that?
I was doing a Brendan Burchard marketing course.
Okay.
Because we know that marketing is not necessarily the strength that I have.
Me
but
neither.
He said, what?
Me neither.
And so I'm like, this is where I'm living. I'm like, okay, in my life, I'm like, what do I need to embody or learn to live into my passion, into the mission that I have, that I believe I have, the calling.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to let go of anything that doesn't serve in that sense. So I'm like, I'm just going to take this freaking course. So he was saying in 2022, people are so worn down that encouragement is really, really important, and being very clear about it. So then the posts that I do that are along those lines seem to be doing really well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, so I think there's a place where that lives, but then where's the line as a media professional where I'm, it's interesting. It's interesting. How do I still, and I talked about this yesterday, how do I still be like, hey guys, this is the current reality. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to encourage you to let's dream. Let's think about what could be other than that. But let's not just be love and light either.
Yeah. It's hard because you can talk to so many different people from so many different walks of life and perspectives on life. And that may also even be at different periods of time that they've spent in a particular interest, right? So for example, some people that are newer to alternative media, maybe have been exploring over the last couple of years, we're going to have a different perspective than the people that have been doing it for 15, 20, even 30 years, right? All that to say, you have all these different perspectives, and all these different people that perceive things differently and respond to things differently, and it becomes so hard to know, how do I write my headlines? How do I, produce, like, why do people respond to this? And so, like, it used to be, I'll be honest, it used to be that Arjun and I could pretty much come up with like a headline that was going to work, I'm going to say like 40% of the time. And that sounds like, oh, wow, hold on. But that's actually a really high percentage. Like, to know that you could write an article and put a headline on it that was truthful, that was representative of the content, and it wasn't baiting people with like, you got to look at number 8 because it'll knock your socks off, right? Like, no, like legitimately good news headline, and this story, this headline, it's 40%, this will go viral. That's very, very good. Now it feels like everything is just toss it up in the air. I have no idea. I have no clue. What changed? What happened? Is our finger not on the pulse, so to speak, of what people are clicking anymore, or have we become, as a society, have we changed in some way? Are we less interested in certain things? Do we only click on things that are really we didn't need to create headlines that were really sensational back in the day. We didn't need to do that. Now it's like, it seems like you have to. Anytime I see a video going viral, or somebody sends me something, or we'll get 10 emails in the pulse email thing saying like, you got to look at this piece of content, the headline and the claims in the content are always radical. Like, it's just like, oh, this spread like wildfire. I mean, look at the headline. It's like, it's out there, right? Look at the thing. And I'm like, man, what's going on, right? But I'll say this. I've recently been kind of looking at The Atlantic, right? So it's a magazine/online platform. Usually it's less about day-to-day journalism per se, and it's more about, writers writing about ideas, right? So stuff that, I personally find exciting. I'm not going to necessarily say that I totally align with a lot of the perspectives that are shared, because, it's of a certain voice and of a certain belief system and so on and so forth. But they don't have to do as much to gain the popularity. There's something about their audience and what ends up being popular within that audience that doesn't need this extravagant headline. And then it made me think, like, I've been feeling, and this is like just coming straight forward, it's like I've been feeling extremely uncomfortable for the last 4 years, kind of being in the alternative space, right? It's not that I dislike people, or I just, there's something about it. It's like, I don't know where I fit. I don't know how I feel. Like, so many people are so angry. So many people are so, um, like, they don't represent like the feelings that I have about the same topics, and yet I'm lumped in with them. And so I started to feel like, what is this? What's going on, right? And I found myself a lot more attracted to audiences that are a little bit more, say, mainstream in their thinking, but very curious. Like, they're very open. Because what I found is that ultimately the hardcore mainstreamers and the hardcore alternative people are kind of the same. They have, and this is what, again, what's fascinating about the study, that alien one that I was telling you about, is that it showed that authoritarians, okay, so these are people by definition of this scientist, are people who are, basically wanting to control what is true, what everybody should do. They spend a lot of time and energy trying to get rid of anybody who thinks differently and all these different things and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like, the hardcore mainstream and the extreme left and the woke left is the same as the hardcore conspiratorial or the hardcore alternative. They're both authoritarians in that sense, right? And again, I don't want to generalize. I think everybody should think about this for themselves, but that's what I've been feeling comfortable with, uncomfortable with, is this idea that I'm part of a community that I feel is so crystallized in its perspectives. And it's no longer fun because we're not exploring anymore. We have the truth. We have the answers. And it's like, do we? so,
Do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in that boat with you. And I'm going to build on that. What I've kind of seen is what's frustrating to me, or what I'm working out in myself, is a victimization on both sides, where it's like, it's not about building, it's not about innovating, it's not about, stretching and growing. It's about, these are the bad people, whatever side it is. They're the reason why my life's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be angry about it because that's the only way I know how to connect. Just as an example, I'm not saying that that's true for everyone. That's just, yeah, I'm very much like, where are the people who want to play? Where are the people who want to, build? And yeah,
because I think, like, again, you mentioned anger earlier and how, like, it's seen as like a bad emotion and like we shouldn't feel it. It's like, I think, wherever on the spectrum people lie, if you're feeling angry, I think there's a lot of reason to feel anger in our world right now. Like, there's a lot of reasons, right? And so it's not, not acknowledging the anger or not sitting with the anger or not processing with the anger. It's more so, have you actually sit and felt and let that anger move through you? Or does the anger come up as a response and then we just start reacting to it and sort of playing it out and energizing it and passing it off to everybody else, and then more. Like, to me, the anger is like a signal of something. It's bringing us in. And with emotions are, like energy that's supposed to sort of move through our body. They provide a momentary experience that's triggered by something that we see or we hear or something like that. And it gains insight into how we think about things or how we perceive things. And I find that this feeling of the emotion, right? Like, I go through this sometimes when I feel confused about my work, right? I will feel this like chaos in my body. And my initial sort of reaction might be to, like, just start looking around, right? Like, let me go to this site, let me go to that site, let me try and figure out why I feel confused about it. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. I quickly catch myself. Maybe not quickly. Sometimes it's like a couple hours. I'm fucking like all over the place. but then you'll be like, okay, hold on a second. Let me just sit and allow this feeling of confusion to move through me, right? And like, when you make the space for it, like, actually put your phone. This is my phone case because my phone's there. You put your phone down, and you put your and you just sit and you make space for the emotion to be what it is, and maybe see does it have a name? Am I feeling confused? Is there also anger mixed within that? Is there kind of chaos? Like, where in my body do I kind of feel this stuff a little bit? Okay, it's kind of whirling around my stomach, no problem. And just kind of acknowledge it and let it be what it is. Um, it can move through you. It can kind of do exactly what it needs to do. And then once it's kind of passed through, it could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be half the day. I mean, I don't know. We're all different, right? We're all at different places within how we experience things too. But you then can a lot more easily look back at it and start saying, what did that experience mean to me? Like, why did I have that feeling? And usually there's a significant amount more resolve, insight. You're not just trapping the emotion or burying the emotion or allowing the emotion to drain the shit out of you. You become like so tired afterwards. You're not reacting. It's almost like an intelligent response. And I think this process of like moving through emotions, feeling emotions, processing emotions, playing with emotions is unfortunately something that all of us, I mean, myself included, I think back to my childhood, that we haven't really mastered, right? We haven't even really kind of become intermediates with. Like we're not the greatest with processing collectively our emotions and really making space for them. So, I found that I find is a big part of if you're feeling a lot of anger about the world, making space for that process is, I think is necessary.
100%. And I think a lot of people are moving towards that with, it is becoming more popular, this embodiment work. And I've talked about this too. Mm-hmm. The thing I've done in my life is I don't necessarily oppress emotion, but I spin story around it so intensely. So I can't remember who was talking about that, but it's essentially we do one or the other. We like ignore or we spin a story, and both are not really processing.
So what's an example of like spinning a story around it?
Okay, so if I feel anger, I'm not saying this is a real story, but my dad came in an interview. I'm going to use this. I'm feeling, what?
You smashed the lamp first.
I smashed a lamp. Right. I'd spin anger. My dad would come into this interview. I'd be like angry, and then I would spin a story about justifiably how growing up my dad was mean to me or something, right? So then we spin on the story because that story for some reason is easier for me to process than for me to look at whatever's in myself, whatever's creating that emotion, and to just sit with it and be like okay with it. And so I have to justify my emotions almost, maybe because I feel shame about feeling them or something. So it's a spinning of a story that justifies a feeling, right. But it's still not just processing and letting yourself feel the thing and let it flow through you.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But the thing about someone who spins a story, I'm going to speak for myself, is I get to feel really smart. I get to feel really justified. I get to feel really self-righteous. And put people in their place. So
yeah, well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep doing it.
Yeah.
Through processing emotion. Anyway, okay. I think it's hilarious that we started out in media and then we ended up here. I think that that's actually so beautiful. And I have a couple questions just because I think that this is important for people to see people who change their minds. So this is my favorite question. What's the biggest lie you once believed?
It's an interesting question. I feel like it's a hard one because like there have definitely been things like where I've changed my mind, like aspects of COVID-19, for example, and that evolving narrative. There was facts and details within that where I changed my mind. Like, for example, I initially in the early days thought that there was way less severity for certain people with the virus. And then as, 30, 60, 90 days went by and you started to realize, okay, for some people, because initially it was like, oh, it's just a cold, it's just a flu. But no, for some people, this is like rocking the shit out of them. Okay, so you kind of change your mind about that. Like that's something recent that I can think about. And I've let the narrative sort of, change my perspective on things.
I'm talking though, like something you believed wholeheartedly. and you had
I
to
would
let
I
go.
would say when I was young, it would probably be kind of this story that if you were just, and this is going to sound like cynical almost, but it's kind of like this story of if you're just a good person and you know, you work hard and you do the right things all the time, that a lot of life will come easy and be fulfilling and say rewarding and good things will happen to you, so to speak. Like what I mean by that is like if you're just a good person or whatever, you're going to get the good jobs and you're going to have the good money and you're going to have this. And when I was young, like that's the story of your parents because they want to raise you to be a high quality individual, right? So they tell you these things and the reward is that you'll have a good life, so to speak. And why I say this sounds cynical and I feel like it needs unpacking is it's like it's not that I feel I don't have a good life or it's not that I feel that good people aren't rewarded or whatever. But it's that classic sort of idea of nice guys finish last type thing, right? It's just to say that it was the acknowledgement as I got older that just because you're doing the right thing or just because you're being good, it doesn't mean that you're going to get rewarded with the things that make this world go round, right? So you can still have happiness, you can still have peace, but what it requires is that to feel good is a different pathway than to attain the money and to attain the things. By being a good person, you get those things and then you feel good. That was a lie. It's more so, the pathway to peace, the pathway to happiness is very different than the societal story. And the good people and all these different things, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the good things will come, right? I hope that was kind of clear, but there's a couple of little nuances in there.
Yeah, and I think what I'm exploring right now, if I can speak to that, is there's something very different than do the right thing and you get the proper life. I think as human beings, we really don't understand that we're here for depth. We're not here
Mm-hmm.
for a shallow experience. So,
Oh, I just lost your sound. Can you hear me? Can I hear you? There we go. You're back.
there we go. Somebody called, so it cut off my audio.
Ah,
So I just want to speak to that. Like, we're here for depth. We're here for something more. I personally believe, and
yeah.
that I don't think that comes from. It can be easy and flowy, but it doesn't come from like easy.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
into hustle culture at all. So I'm not saying it's about the hustle. I'm saying it's about depth.
Yeah.
It's about yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that it's sort of that old, sort of adage, like, when you're in the moment of something that's very challenging and difficult you might see it as like, wow, this is a harsh experience. Why the heck is this happening to me, right? But 2, 3 years later, when you've sort of moved through that and processed and, sort of seen the fruits of that, and I'm not saying fruits as a material sense per se, but the fruits as in like, wow, I expanded my capacity to deal with difficult situations, or I expanded my capacity to communicate my needs, or whatever it may be. You look back and go, yeah, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything, right? Um, and that's kind of this whole idea of the depth and sometimes it's not always easy to understand, but
No, and
there's stuff.
this idea of what's right is I
Yeah.
think there's like general consideration for other people, and I think there's love. I think that alignment with love is quote unquote right, but that's been skewed so much, the definition of that.
Yeah.
So what's right is also up for question.
Perfect.
Okay, and what would you tell people? I know this is like off topic from what we're talking about, but I just think it's important for people to hear this message. What would you tell people who are just waking up to what's going on? And let's say, like, I've had people message me, they took the V and they're like devastated right now. They're like, I wish I would have known this information sooner. And there's a lot of people who are waking up. And as you kind of said earlier, clicking onto something alternative that says everybody's going to die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not encouraging.
No.
To say
Well,
the
it's not
least.
helpful either, right? Because nobody can know that, right?
No.
So how is this a helpful narrative? Um,
And what would you tell these people? What would you tell these people who are like waking up?
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I find it hard to sort of provide general thoughts because I think each person has like a little bit of a different constitution as to how they might be like, how should I go about that? Or how should I, with wherever they're at in their own exploration right now. But it's like, for me, I would say that like really, get multiple perspectives on something that you're looking at. Like if I spoke to a guy who just kind of started exploring things about a year ago, and he was saying a lot of things, which reminded me so much of like what it felt like way back in like 2009 and 10, when like a lot of this stuff was just getting going for us and like for a lot of other people. And sometimes there's like a lack of wisdom in how to navigate this space and how to navigate information. And I just kind of bestowed onto him this idea of like, just be open, be curious, right? Like try not to, really just like, this is what is going on, or this is exactly what's happening, or if this doctor or that scientist says it, then it's automatically true. Like if we're going to tear apart the doctors and the scientists in the mainstream, like why do we give all the credence to the doctors and scientists on the other side, so to speak, right? It's just to say that it's like, let the evidence be the evidence. If you feel a gut feeling about something, pay attention to it, listen, see how you feel about it, right? But ultimately, maintain a playful attitude as much as you can, right? Like be curious, like be playful. If you notice yourself getting really serious, see if you can take a moment, stop, and sort of re-question how you feel about something or how you're approaching the situation, right? Why am I losing the playfulness, right? What is going on? That said, and this is why I say it's hard to give general advice, is it's like for somebody that it's like they can't be playful because they have a very large fear about something going on. Maybe they regret being vaccinated and now they feel in their mind that they have a toxin in them that's going to kill them, right? That's a totally different situation. So, again, general advice is tough, but I would just say that it's like all roads at the end of the day, I think, lead back to a greater sense of self-awareness, a greater sense of embodiment, and just understanding how we're feeling about something gives us so much more freedom in how we're navigating information, gives us so much more freedom in how we're able to, not get so crystallized in our perspectives and being able to kind of take in multiple things and play with them, be curious about them. I think there was a comment there, being willing to change your mind, I think is definitely a very big thing. That's just some thoughts.
Beautiful. Joe, how can people support you, get involved, hang out with you digitally?
Yeah. So, I don't use a lot of social media these days, but I from time to time I do. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I'll do it a lot more often soon. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But there is my Instagram account, which you can see here. A lot of our work, pretty well, you can navigate and find and consume through thepulse.one. That's .one. So that'll lead you to, our articles, our videos, when we release podcast episodes, this sort of thing. We have a YouTube channel. You can get on our email list from our website, our Telegram channel from our website. We're kind of going through a process of, speaking of depth, of kind of moving a little bit away from like more day-to-day newsy, information-y type stuff to more, deeper sort of philosophical driven, societal driven, like asking big questions and exploring some of the big, societal themes that need to be talked about if we're going to transform and if we're going to move towards a better world, so to speak. That's what we try and do. That's what we try and embody. But, that's where to find it.
And what about the Explorer Lounge?
Oh, and the Explorer Lounge. So if you want to become a member and support our work and join in on that whole journey, you can check out the Explorer Lounge. We have, I believe it's on the website. It's under membership or something like that. That supports what we're doing and maybe takes it to a bit of a deeper level as well.
Love it. Thank you so much, Joe. You kind of said this in your last answer, but I want to bring attention to it. Joe's so thoughtful, so intelligent, but he truly is one of the most playful people I've ever met in my life. And yeah. I think that's why, and no pressure now, you're like, I have to be playful. No. I think that's why you're able to, many people have said to me when they watch your work and they see you, it's like a calming effect. And I think it is because you really embody this playfulness, this curiosity, and I think the world needs more of that. So thanks, Joe.
That's it. That's all. That's great feedback. And I hope, because I got to say, sometimes behind the scenes, I go through my moments of feeling, what am I doing and why, right? So, that is there as well. But Yeah, I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, have a good day. See you
All
guys.
right, thank you. Appreciate the time and the conversation in the chat.
Yeah, okay, see ya.
All right, take care.
Thanks everyone for joining us.